crime against humanity, and we are clear on that. At the same time, it represented the largest movement of humanity in the history of the modern world. It was a phenomenal migration.
On arrival in the Caribbean, the slaves would be washed, oiled, and made to look as healthy as possible. They were expensive. A slave cost around £4,000 in today's terms. Experienced planters looked for slaves from tribes they thought were hard-working and docile. Sugar production demanded a scale of organized labor never before attempted. The cane had to be cut, crushed, and milled in just a few weeks, or else it would be useless. Planters needed huge gangs of slaves throughout the year. As the demand grew, they needed more.
By the end of the 18th century, there were around 1 million slaves in the British Caribbean, and that these slaves were working about 3,000 hours a year, completely unrecompensed, because they would grow their own food largely in their own very scant spare time. So there were 3,000 hours, 1 million slaves, that's 3,000 million hours spent producing sugar, spent producing coffee, spent producing cotton.
On the plantations, men and women were separated and given new names. Conditions were harsh. The average slave would survive just 8 years. The regime was brutal. Those who refused to work were flogged by the especially appointed punishment slave. Persistent runaways had their limbs amputated. Some might have their orifices packed with gunpowder. Planters would compete to light the fuse in an entertainment they called putting a little powder in the arse of a nigger. Thomas Thistlewood, a plantation manager, kept a diary.
Put Hazat in the bilboes, gagged him, locked his hands together, rubbed him with molasses and exposed him naked to the flies all day and to the mosquitoes all night.
There was little hope of escape. Even though the planter was in a minority, he knew that there was a formidable backup. The profits of the Caribbean and the Americas drew in rival European powers. They were constantly at war, and their military garrisons doubled as the guardians of the plantocracy.
But we need to recognize that slavery was maintained in the West Indies as a result of the most formidable system of imperial authority. 6 or so European nations, all developing empires, massive military buildup in this region, and slaves were kept.
I think everybody in this country now realize there is racialism. There is racialism, especially in employment, in offices, and even university degrees and all like that.
My Uncle Tom, he was white. I used to have to go in the back alley, or back entry you would call it, if I wanted to visit my other uncle.
The teachers were overtly racist and treated us accordingly. We weren't treated as individuals. We were treated as a group.
You didn't think that you would be discriminated just because of the color of your skin.
Whatever they put on the front page, it's always very black youth did. Yeah, and so, or black this, black that. It's always something very bad.
Muggers. But if it's white, it's just muggers. I remember playing netball, and in the netball team there was 3 of us called Caroline, and one was called Carol, one was called Kazzy, and I was called Sooty. But to me that didn't mean anything. And I remember Dad actually coming along one time to watch me play, and he said to me afterwards, well, why are they calling you Sooty? And I just said, well, Dad, there's 3 of us here, and they have to, you know, choose different names. So he says, well, why couldn't they call you Carol or Kazzy? And I said, I don't know. He said, they're only calling you Sooty because you're black. And I said, oh, Dad, don't be stupid. But then I actually took stock and thought about it. Well, maybe he was right. And that's when it hit me that maybe there was such a thing as racism.
The roots of racism were planted long ago. Perhaps it helped to justify the inhumanity of slavery when Africans were shipped as a commodity. The myths about those from the Dark Continent were embellished during Britain's imperial reign. Grace Wilkie, who is now in her 70s, was born in Liverpool to an English mother and African father. She was soon made aware of racism.
The Africans, a lot of them married white women, you see. And I didn't see the harm in marrying somebody if you liked them. And I don't see why anybody else should, you know, and I think it stemmed from there. And it would have caused perhaps their brothers or their fathers to get antagonistic because, you know, it's very hard for you to see your son or your daughter marry into another race.
The war was over in November 1918, and it was just only a few months after when the soldiers and sailors and all demobilized from the army and the armed forces. During the war, there were a lot of jobs. Anybody can get a job if the munition factories was on. Color didn't mind. Black, white, yellow, green hair, everybody can work. But after the job was over and they were all demobilized, the white soldiers, they seemed to forget that the black man was also in the Navy and the Army with them. And they couldn't get the jobs. And the few black men were still working in some of the factories that's not closed yet. And they demanded that these black people would leave the factory so they can get in. Englishmen. These black people were savages from Africa. In those days, every black man was supposed to come from Africa. They never thought about the West Indians or anything of the sort. So the race riot started.
My mother told me, when I started to understand what had happened during the riots, she said all the whites and the blacks were fighting, there was cutting, some got arrested, and she was compelled at that time to put me in a tin bath. They used tin baths then because there weren't a lot of bathrooms, and covered me over with blankets and planks to protect me, because they were throwing bottles, bricks, and anything, you name it, through the window.
A friend and I, a West Indian from St. Lucia, we were going to see a friend in Brownlow Hill, Liverpool this was. And we took the tram to the Adelphi Hotel. And we had to turn right to Brownlow Hill, where the friend we were going to see lived. As we get off the bus, these gangs spotted us. Here's some more niggers. Before we knew what was happening, they were chasing us. So we ran like hare. While running, on the left-hand side of Brownlow Hill, I can quite remember it just like yesterday, a woman opened the door. I mean, they were all white women, there were no black women in those days, so my friend and I ran around the corner into the hallway, and we found the door open. We came in, the woman shut the door, and we went upstairs. They made us a